Good morning, dear live learners of the University of Aruba and of the University of Aruba and Aruba in general. Welcome to another interesting presentation this morning. My name is Deborah Alexander, and I am the coordinator for the Center for Lifelong Learning here at the university. And it is with great pleasure that we have this very interesting presentation looking at Aruba's national integrity system. Integrity, as we all know, is very important in who we are and shaping our community. And it forms one of the very important core values of the university, especially our academic integrity. Having said that, before we continue with this presentation, I would just like to draw your attention to one or two details and features. This is a Zoom webinar, so we are unfortunately unable to see your faces and have that interaction as we are normally used to, but please do take advantage of the chat button, which is at the lower part of your screen, just to send a shout out, letting us know your name, where you work, and maybe what you expect from this, or just your comments. I would ask that you specifically use the Q&A button for your questions to the panel members. These questions will be answered either during the presentation if they're very urgent, and if not, at the end of the presentation by the panel members. This presentation will be held in English, and I could imagine that some of you might either feel comfortable, of course, in English or in Dutch. Please pose your questions in either or of these languages. Unfortunately, I think only one of our members still remembers a bit of his papiamento from his days back here. And I think he might try his best to answer you, but I'm not sure if he would be able completely. So do be as open as you want in asking the questions in your language, but we would prefer English and Dutch. Any questions that you have in terms of this presentation or to the panel members, also use the chat or send an email which will be made available to you later on. And without further ado, I would like to give this presentation over to our first host, Willeke.
Thank you very much, Deborah. Just in between, I see a question coming in about the chat and whether it's functioning. So maybe if I start my introduction, you can double check whether everybody can access the questions and answer.
Yeah.
Okay, so good morning to all of you on behalf also of Saxion University of Applied Sciences. My name is Willeke Slingeland. I'm a professor of applied research at Saxion University. I've been involved in integrity research for more than 10 years. Together with my research team, which are here today as panelists, we have been asked to look at the national integrity system of Aruba. And we have carried out previous national integrity systems before. And before going more into depth of it, I think it's a very valuable tool to look at the comprehensive integrity system of any country. So I'm looking very much forward to having a discussion with all of you and looking at your point of view on terms of the Aruban integrity system. So you might see some of my colleagues with their camera on. Some of them will present today, others will present in the upcoming webinars, because this is the first of 3 webinars to come. And so besides myself, Thomas Riemensma will present today, and a colleague Ben den Tuyder will present today. And in the coming weeks, my colleague Frank Diepemaat and Esther Langkamp will present. So first of all, if we discuss the national integrity system. So a brief introduction, because today is the first webinar of the 3 webinars in total in the upcoming weeks. And I think it's important that we have a look briefly at the methodology on the national integrity system. So here it is. So looking back, I think it was last year already that we were asked to carry out the national integrity system. And it's important that I also mention which other parties are involved. We were asked by, the country, Aruba, the government, to have a look and explore what the national integrity system will look like. And this is in close cooperation with the Stichting Deugdelijk Bestuur Aruba, which is actually the party requesting us. So it's many stakeholders involved. And Saxion University of Applied Sciences has used the Transparency International methodology for quite some time, because the National Integrity System methodology was introduced over 15 years ago by Transparency International. This is the anti-corruption watchdog which is seated in Berlin. And we are very pleased with the cooperation we have with the University of Aruba, because at the start of our cooperation, when we tried to do the exploration on data and trying to organize interviews, of course, we were all experiencing the COVID-19 consequences. So right after we started with the research, we were limited in terms of finding the data for the National Integrity System. So ever since, we have been in close cooperation with the University of Aruba. We've met the students, we've met the staff, and of course, these are the eyes and ears on the ground, which is so much needed. And I think if we talk about integrity in general, this is something each young person should adopt, because I think the younger generation is also our hope worldwide. They have a good sense of moral awareness, and they can actually make systems change to the positive. So if I, Dara, can you click? Need to click. Yeah. So over 100 national integrity system studies have been carried out. And if you are interested, you can have a look at Transparency's website. They have a very good research portal where you can actually see all the chapter NIS studies, and actually also there's comparison research. And I think it's important because worldwide, every country is, trying to prevent corruption, is trying to invest in good quality of governance. And if we can learn from one another best practices, if we can exchange information, this is the way forward. So the National Integrity System, as I mentioned it, I will abbreviate it as NIS for now on. It's an integrated, comprehensive approach in which we, as the research group now, we have started to evaluate the NIS Aruba from a qualitative point of view. So the research itself is not about measuring in terms of the corruption perception index or the foreign briberies index, as you might know from Transparency International. It's more about getting a clear picture of what are the strengths and what are actually points for which needs to be further developed in a total of a system which a country forms. So we look at the foundations, and my colleague Esther Langkamp in the coming webinars will discuss about that. So political, institutional foundations, social, cultural foundations, which are, of course, always the basis of every country in the world in which institutions are functioning. So if we look at this, of course, we look at the entire governance institutions, the NIS methodology is based on multi-stakeholder engagement. So it's not our research group actually who's doing it on its own. We need also your point of views, your experience, your ideas. So it's a close cooperation with all other stakeholders at Aruba. So here you see all the parties I just referred to. So we're very grateful with this independent relation which we have to work on this important cause. And I think it's very brave that the Aruban government has opted for this national integrity system, because it shows that it dares to be vulnerable for points where we think suggestions for improvement needs to be made. So hopefully Aruba will get the attention later on its braveness that actually it was involved in a NIS. So looking back, I mentioned already, when we first started looking at the NIS Aruba, of course, we started with desk research. There were so many interesting reports written about Aruba. And nevertheless, of course, we wanted to talk to all those key experts at the island itself. So we needed to speak to all the key figures in place. People in terms of level, staffing, management level, but also operations-wide. So ears and eyes on the ground. And we had a lot of interesting interviews planned for March, April, and May. And a part of our team was supposed to travel to Aruba. And of course, we were stuck because of COVID-19. So immediately we had to change and shift. So that's when our close cooperation with the university started. So maybe you can click, Deborah, in the next few slides. So we had to organize the local support for the research long distance. And thankfully, we have Zoom, Teams, Blackboard, all sorts of tooling which help us to communicate, and even the time difference was not that much an issue. So in the meantime, we went on to continue to communicate and do the research. So students from the University of Aruba and students from Saxion also working together for well, data exploration. So today we are here. This is my introduction, but we will also start to present partly our findings, and they're not complete. So that's why we need you. We invite you to also respond. But these are the first features we would like to discuss with you, the things we see after being involved in research for a couple of months. So that's why we, well, refer to it as midterm findings in Aruba. Yes, Deborah?
Yes, hold on. Yep.
So this is our invitation, as you can see. So I'm particularly fond of working with a system approach toward integrity, because in the couple of years I've been involved in this research, I've seen many countries, including my own country, and too often integrity, good governance, or corruption prevention is too much isolated on different actions or individual laws. And I think what is great of the NIS methodology is that it takes on a holistic view. How is everything interrelated? So it looks at law. Of course, there needs to be a legal framework and you need to have strong foundations, but more importantly, it looks at the practice. What is actually going on in reality, in real life? And so we call that in terms of strength of weaknesses, but preferably we also look at where can we actually strengthen the blind spots or the rooms for improvement. So we work with you, we work with experts, we work with the academia at Aruba, and with the local civil society organizations. So it's a multi-stakeholder approach. Yes, Deborah. And as you can see, no, it's not causal relations, it's a system thinking. So from a system thinking, you might complex system thinking. If you actually change one thing in a local community, everything starts moving. So if we include another set of rules on transparency, the entire system will change. And it's up to us together with experts in Aruba to actually see how is the system currently heading, what direction is it heading. So instead of thinking that A will lead to B, we will actually look at how will A influence C and C will influence F. So hopefully when we finalize this, and I guess it's important for you to realize that we will finalize our report in spring 2021. Of course, the most important thing I think is the policy recommendation. What do we think needs to be strengthened? And what is already being strengthened? Because we realize there's a lot of work in progress taking place. So we focus also on further research, so to keep the academic tradition to do research alive, and what concrete actions can be taken. Yes, next slide, please. So we've been talking about the NIS. This is actually what the NIS looks like. Some of you might have seen it before. It's the Greek temple metaphor. So instead of focusing on isolated pillars, the NIS sees that if you have strong foundations in any society, you will establish institutions, so the legislator, executive, judiciary. The first two will be discussed today, but also more on the right side, civil society, media, political parties. These are the institutions most countries worldwide have actually established for long term, long back, or recently. And any good governance, any integrity system which is strong actually has the right set of institutions which make sure that checks and balances are in place. And if you have the strong foundations and the strong institutions with the good legal framework and the practice which actually observes the laws, the outcome will be a strong integrity system. And a strong integrity system, and that I think is very important to underline, is of course influencing rule of law, sustainable development, and quality of life. And some of you might know it, but I too often hear people think that any form of corruption or integrity violation are still a victimless form of crimes. Well, I don't think so. If you look at this metaphor, it really says that a strong integrity system is of general interest to all of us for these big causes like sustainable development, quality of life, and rule of law. Yes, Deborah.
Yeah.
So just to give you an idea on how do we assess the integrity system, of course, we will look into individual pillars, but we will look at the individual pillars by looking at specific indicators. So in terms of capacity, we look at the resources, so human capital, financial resources. We will look at the independence. How independent is this pillar institution? We will look at the governance of the pillar. How transparent is it? Does it take accountability for the way it functions? Are the integrity mechanisms in place? Is there any integrity policies set up? How are they actually observed in practice? And I think very important to also distinguish the unique role each individual pillar has. And if you have all the right things in place, on at least an average level, then you have a strong integrity system. So these are the things our qualitative research is actually looking into. Thank you. Deborah, next, please. So what we have seen in other countries, of course, is a very grim image, like a national integrity system which falls apart. Because of its systemic approach means that if there's any weaknesses in terms of the foundation or in terms of an individual institution, you have a domino effect. So if this is, for example, if you have a country where the public sector is very poor, or where the media is no longer independent, you mean that the watchdogs in a system do not take on their role as the NIS described. So it will all fall. So one poor institution will influence other institutions. So this is what we've looked at for Aruba. What are the strengths of the individual pillars, but also how strong are they collectively? And what does this mean in terms of their outcome? Yes, thank you. So one aspect which is important, if we talk about system approach towards integrity, we talk about holistic approach, the integrated approach. It's very important to think about all the individuals like you, yourself, and us. So integrity is something which is also very important to look at the individuals at Aruba. So all these pillars are made of human beings in their professional capacity. So their professional capacity means that they should also adhere to all these indicators within the pillar. And what we think, for what we've seen so far, but of course we still are collecting data, that too often the institutions are not independent enough, because individuals, and I've tried to visualize it with this image, are very active, involved in networks, social networks, with their friends, with their colleagues, because of their previous careers or because of their political partisanship. So if we look at it, we should also focus on the individuals and how are you active as an expert, as a civil servant, as a police officer, as a journalist, in what networks? And do these networks actually overlap? Are there possible risky red flags in terms of conflict of interest? So besides the fact that we look at institutions and the entire integrity system, we will also pinpoint on the field of individual professional roles of those actively involved in pillars. And this is actually the social network system, which we will focus on. So how do we actually increase the awareness? And this is not only something which we do at Aruba, but this is something we do in many other research in terms of integrity, so that this type of awareness is increased. So you do not focus only on your individual relations, what do I do in terms of this relation to this person B, but in what other circles am I active, and how do these circles interact in such a way that the integrity system is no longer independent. So this is pretty much, from my point of view, a bit of the methodology background. So we will now go to the first findings, but before the first findings, I would like to ask a polling question. Because of course, networks is a very important form of social networks. No society nor community could live without networks. It's actually something we also tell our students, to actively be involved in networks, because that's a way to proceed in your career. Nevertheless, there should also be awareness of the blind spots, risk involved in networks. So just to have an idea about your networks, all of you, so on behalf of Saxion and Aruba, social networks together form an important social capital. which is one of the major components of the NIS. And we are looking into the question of how many networks are you as a person active. So polling can continue. Yes. Just to get an idea of how dense the network society at Aruba is. So this can be friends, family, colleagues, students, political parties, neighborhoods, informal and formal networks. I hope all my colleagues are also actually answering the question.
Yes. We have 20 seconds more before answers the poll, so we're almost there. The findings will be shared in the next 15 seconds.
Great. Yeah, so good. Yeah.
Yes, and here let's go. They're still voting. We're at 91%. Let's see, and.
Great. So this gives us some idea already of your point of view, your perspective on networks. So the majority of respondents is actually participating, about average 5 social networks of friends, colleagues, families. And well, the other half, more or less, has even more than 10 or approximately 10. So this gives us the idea that networks are very important at Aruba, which makes sense, given it's an island. So thank you. So thank you for answering this question. Let me have a look. Yeah, so I think if this polling question can be closed, Deborah, then we can actually go to the first findings. And I will give the floor to my colleague Thomas Riemesma, and he will start his introduction with the trias politica, so the first 3 pillars, and we'll explore in depth the first 2 together with my colleague Ben. So can we click this polling away?
You can, yes, Willeke, you can click that part, you can click it.
So thank you on behalf of for sending your answers. Very interesting, hope to discuss them further later on. So Thomas, can I ask you to continue with introduction on checks and balances?
Yes, you can, Willeke. Thank you very much for your clear introduction on the NIS system. Bon dia, tur henderan. Good morning, my name is Thomas Riemesma. I'm a researcher and lecturer on Saxion University, and I work at the team of Willeke, Slingerland. But in a former past, I used to be a lecturer on the University of Aruba as well in the beginning of 2000 until 2007, I recall, for 6 years. I was a lecturer civil law, also on introduction of law, and I also worked as a legislative lawyer on Aruba. So I'm very pleased to be back in the field of law here on the University of Aruba as the Center of lifelong learning, say correctly, is part of. What I want to do first is have a short introduction on the checks and balances that are in place in every democracy and also on Aruba. Now, the legislature is, of course, a very important pillar, but it does not stand on itself. It's part of the system that we call in Latin the trias politica. And so we have 3 pillars, and these pillars form together checks and balances and form a balance within the political system. And first we have the power that governs, the executive power, the government of Aruba, and the ministers together in the ministers' council, governed by the minister president. And that power is controlled by the people. And the people, well, that's you, all the citizens of Aruba, as you are being represented by the parliament of Aruba, called the legislative branch, or also the legislature, and with special powers. Now, and then there is a third check by the judiciary, And the judges were people, businesses, civic organizations can go if they feel they are not represented in a correct manner, in a correct way. Now, these three pillars are supposed to be separation of three powers in order to create checks on important democratic issues in order to find a fair balance on governance of society. Now, today we do the first two pillars, and next week we do the judiciary together with the enforcement agencies. Now, also briefly, because not everybody is a scholar, a lawyer, and this session is recorded also for students and for anyone who wants to see it back. So why do we have this separation? Well, the concept of democracy, that people govern themselves, is of course invented in Greece. It developed over the centuries, very briefly. Different wars and even revolutions shaped the general system in which the people themselves represented the power. You have to prevent that there is a concentration of power without efficient control. Now, the one-liner is power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts absolutely. So that's why you need that system. There are dark examples in the world where absolute power was abused, both in very big but also very small countries. But there are also a number of big and small countries where the system works very fairly well. So you need to develop a system in which there is, up to a certain level, some control. And that works for that specific society. And that's the point that I want to stress. You can make that democratic system of checks and balances tailor-made. And that can also be done in Aruba. And because we have different systems worldwide, we've got European systems, and the system in France and in the Netherlands is not the same as in the USA. But the system of checks and balances is applied in all democracies in the world. Not all countries are democracies, and we also have dictatorships, and we have socialistic systems in China, for example. And in the Middle East, there are different systems. But the basic thought of checks and balances is ruled in the democracies. And the system should lead to trust of citizens in the mechanism, as it is a key part of what we call the rechtsstaat in Netherlands, the rule of law, having a fair system. So that's what we are going to talk about today. And we take the legislative branch as an example. Now, what does the legislative branch? Maybe Deborah, you can click on the slide so we don't see the poll. I still see the poll. Oh, I have to click it myself. Very smart. Yes. Could you click again? Oh, there we have the whole slide in one time.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I should have clicked that one before. And so I've been talking about the Trias Politica, and the legislative power controls the executive power, but it also a primary function is also to legislate. The executive power adopts laws and legislation together with the legislature. Now, so both powers can make legislational initiatives. Most of the time, it's the government that makes a draft ordinance. Well, I can mention a few of the recent past, the ordinance on the financing of political parties, the national ordinance on the ombudsperson, ombudsman in Dutch, could also be a woman, of course. Finally, there is a book 2 of the Dutch, the Aruban Civil Code, very important for the functioning of companies. And so these ordinances are all initiated by the government of Aruba. And then it's up to the Staten to have checks and to see if everything is covered and if it's covered in a proper way. And in that way, you can find a balance. Now, that second function And that control function goes also through the legislative process. And because the government has to make plans, but also needs to address finances in order to realize those plans. Well, that's called budget. And budgeting is also laid down in a national ordinance every year. And it's up to the states, the parliament, to check whether all the money is spent, addressed in a balanced way, checks and balances. So if you look at these features of the legislature, direct mandate from the people, proportional representation, and that is something that's very special on all the islands, because one parliamentarian represents 5,000 Arubans. So there's a very close link between a representative of the people and the people. Now, 21 seats, majority vote is 11 votes, as everybody on the island, I think, knows. So the primary state body is the legislature, political and budgetary controller, as I briefly gave some examples. And the parliament has specific rights for the parliamentarians. Now, I can't see the last bullet. I'm not sure. I think there is a last one, because there is the beam here in the other. But after the specific rights for the parliamentarians, there is one about the chair, I recall. And the chairperson is the primus inter pares, I wrote down. And the president of the parliament, special position is actually part of the making of the executive power of the government. Oh, you see it, maar ik zie hem niet, Esther. Anyway, I know what it's about, but primus inter pares is that I want to stress that the president is not like the boss of the parliament. He is equal to the other parliamentarians, and he should also account what has been going on in Parliament. Now, we will come to that in the coming slides. This is the next slide. Oh, this is the executive power. Yes, everybody knows. We have the map, the poor, the red. You know all the ministers by name. I also do by now. Next slide, please. Yes, it's good to show that these three powers, as I mentioned in the introduction, should be in balance. Some put the executive power on top, but the legislative power is the highest power in a democracy. So you could put it very well on top. Checks and balances, that's what I mentioned. But to be honest, if you talk about checks and balances, the system is more complex. And I also put this slide in the presentation to give you the bigger picture, because in order to have a thorough check on the executive power, Parliament needs to be able to have a good eye on what the government does and how it is financially stated. And so if we go to the executive power, they get information of a number of governmental institutions, also international institutions, and we have nationally, we have the SER, we also have the IMF, we have the Central Bank, we have the CF, the NCPF. Now, Commission in this case, this is not the first presentation about good governance and checks and balances. And in that way, we stand on the shoulders of giants. In 1997, this matter was already addressed by the report Kalidad, and there were a number of reports, as Willeke already mentioned. And this particular slide was made by another giant, as we may call him, Armand Hessels, for the Stichting Deugdelijk Bestuur Aruba, already gave in 2017 a presentation of about good governance, and that the system of checks and balances is a bit more complicated, as I just addressed. And because what you see here is that on the information that the government gets, they make a policy, government policy. Now, and then it goes to the Council of Advice, the Raad van Advies, and they give an advice on if it's all realizable, and if there is sufficient budget, and if the budget should be spent. Then it goes for an accountancy check to the CAD, the Centrale Accountantsdienst, and that's all in order with the accountability law. So the checks are not only made by Parliament. No, there are also what we could call sub-checks and balances. Now, and these sub-checks and balances are also part of the national integrity system and are also analyzed by us as a research team. Now, why do I also show this slide? In order to stress that in the past years, with all what happened, this was already addressed with the government. So if we go to the next slide, Deborah, here you can see that all the concern that arose in society after the IBIS case and the corruption survey of the central bank, there was already a commission installed. We call here, you can see it on the top, the Committee of Recovery and Innovation of Aruba after the COVID disaster in relation with issues of good governance, of failing of good governance. What you see here in the left corner is that there is a number of red crosses. And these red crosses were already analyzed in the past as failures in the system of checks and balances. So it's not up to this research group to detect all the failures in the system of checks and balances, in the trias system, or in the overall system of good governance, because that has already been done a number of times. So we have our own function in making it more aware and also have feedback and input from society. And so that's an important stimulus to have this presentation today. And that's what Willeke already mentioned in the start, but it's always good to stress it again. So let's go to the next slide. Yes, here you see what the GOA has done. I say GOA, Government of Aruba. The core problems are identified. You see this here, 1 up to 5. They are concise, described. Here is a description. And the outcome of an ideal is also mentioned by this committee as an advice to the government. And if we go to the next slide, and then there was a prioritization of steps to make. And for people who want to know more about the way in which the government has dealt in the meantime with all these recommendations, then you should have a look at the master plan that is presented by the government online, in which they address all these issues. Now, if we have a look at this slide, in what is the way that we tackled the legislature, and what was the research approach? Of course, we wanted to do more field research in Aruba. Take the plane and drive around. I know all the places. I know a lot of persons. So we talked with a lot of persons, but it was mainly online. Desktop research was done. We read the big books, Van Rijn, Hogers, these books. Those are the basics of theory, all kinds of online sources, all these reports. Of course, the report Kalidad, the FESCA report with very important recommendations for the future of the states. Again, analyzed in the VODC report of 2011. I already mentioned Armand Hessels and the foundation, and Armand wrote 6 reports. There's an enormous body of knowledge on good governance, on the checks and balances on this island, and that's a very valuable treasure, you might say. Have so much information. Now, what's also what was a lot of fun was reading all the blogs on social media, Batti Blakey and Abe Maenta, and the Amigo, all the newspapers. So I've been reading that for the last half year with a lot of enthusiasm and interest. A special word of thanks should go to Romy Rutgers and Rijn Lubbers. Those are 2 students that graduated on this NIS research project by researching the first 3 pillars, the Trias Politica. So they interviewed Gerard Hogers, Professor Van Rijn, a number of scholars from the University of Aruba, also former employees of the Raad van Advies, number of civil servants I also interviewed, and we also spoke parliamentarian. And I have to leave it with one. I've tried to contact more, but thus far that wasn't successful. Now, I call these findings preliminary because we still like to talk with Mr. Thijssen, the chair of Parliament. We also like to talk with the clerk, the department of the clerk. And in the future, we will talk with ministers, political party leaders, citizens of the civil society, maatschappelijke middenveld. And most of all, what is also important is that we receive feedback, engagement from new generations, students, young people, journalists, artists, writers, entrepreneurs. The role van het kaft, that's also one of the budgetary functions that we assessed. But for the power of the legislator I saw a pop-up question comment. Did we look at the kaft? Yes, of course we did. And we know that in the budgeting of this moment, there are strict budgetary rules set by the CAFT, and that has a strong influence on the way that the Parliament is able to check on the executive power, because for important part of the CAFT, of the budgetary power, the CAFT also has a stake. But in the current situation, it's still Parliament that does the checks. But maybe we can have a question later on this subject, and just write the question after the first poll. We can go to the next slide, Deborah. Yes. And if we click again, we have a first look at the resources. De middelen. Zijn er voldoende middelen? And if you think about resources, that's part of the indicator capacity. Now, financial compensation is regulated by national ordinance. If we talk about the compensation for parliamentarians, parliamentarians have human support, and the infrastructure is in place to support. And because if we look at the methodology of the NIS, these 3 sub-indicators are guiding questions. Is there a financial, what are the finances? What is the human support? And how is the infrastructure? Now, on paper, this is dealt with, but we made a poll. And well, what do you think? Are the finances, the human support, and the infrastructure sufficiently?
We have 30 seconds more for everyone to answer the poll.
Yes, we got to 22 of 46, goes up 26.
So we're looking for 90 to 100% participation.
Almost.
Almost.
2/3 now. Well, we're going up to 70.
And then it stopped.
All right, then it stops. No, support and infrastructure are marginal. And so the compensation is quite fair if you look at if you compare it with parliamentarians of other countries within the Kingdom of the Netherlands. St. Maarten makes parliamentarians, they make the most. They have the best deal. In Aruba, it's quite fair. It's not the highest. There was some input about extra income that should be reported, and it was not clear if that happened. It was also not clear if presents, gifts, if that was registered in a proper way. To say that it is all adequate, yeah, that's over the top. It's not. The feedback we got is that, well, parliamentarians feel, at least the one that I spoke, is that the support is not sufficient. The archive is, if we talk about the infrastructure, archive is not staffed well enough. Used to be a lady that knew everything. She is sick, and then het kaartenhuis valt in elkaar, as we say in Dutch, and then it doesn't work in a proper way. So there are more issues. No, support and infrastructure are marginal. Yes, parliamentarians also want to have more back-off by staff. For example, if they want to make an initiative law, an ordinance, yeah, then they have to do it themselves. Well, they're not to be a legislative lawyer takes years of training. I did that myself for a year, and that's not easy. You really have to be a scholarly lawyer in order to be able to do that. So they want support, and the support they get goes now through the executive, and that's not an ideal situation. Now, and on the finance, the budget is part of the budget that the government sets up. So it's not that Staten makes their own budget. That was also a point of criticism that was brought back to us. So support is desired. Also, the website, the digital infrastructure of Parliament doesn't function in a proper way. IT should be upgraded. Well, I know that this is not the moment to talk about extra money, but if you want to perfectionize the system, then that should be dealt with. Of course, in the report that we will deliver in the spring of 2021, and we label, we map all these different parts, but for now we can leave it here with these few questions. Let's go to the next one. Independency. Yeah, that's another indicator that is measured by the NIS. Of course, the independency should be guaranteed in the ideal system of checks and balances. But if that is realistic on a small island as Aruba, where a lot of people know each other, yeah, that's something else. Now, 3 bullets. Members of Parliament can vote freely without any burden. Parliamentarians have constitutional rights that should guarantee the independency of the Parliament. And civilians can send letters or even petitions. And we made a nice poll for you to see what the score is. So the poll is, do members of Parliament, oh, it's already gone. They really vote without a burden. Yes, without any peer pressure. I will say something about peer pressure. Yes, there are immunity safeguards, free vote. No, there is with a difficult word, political patronage. No, there is a business lobby going on. And I think Deborah will say in a few moments that you only have half a minute left to fill out this poll.
Well, you just said it, Thomas. I'm not going to repeat it, but they do have going down to the last 15 seconds.
Right. Now, the large majority shows there is political. There is political patronage. Well, there has been written a lot about political patronage, yeah? and in simple form is that. Now, yeah, if you say that this exists, then that system means that parliamentarians would make decisions, would make support law in order to get something back from it. And it doesn't have to mean that they are being paid or something, or that it's corrupt. No, there is a tit for tat system going on. You are being chosen by certain people, so you reward them in a certain way with their support for them in the things that you do in Parliament. Political patronage. There's been written a lot about that. Also in the FESCA report, it was stressed. And also in the VODC report, where you can have a look at the critical reports of Mr. Hessels. So that there is sometimes the idea, at least, is that there more a personal interest, in the individual interest, than that it's about an ideology for which the politician, the parliamentarian, stands. So yes, and now yeah, and then we can sociologize about what is the reason. Is it the small scale of the island? The fact that family ties are very interesting, very important, I should say. I also want to say that patronage is not a thing that only happens on Aruba or only on small islands. We also have it in parts of Netherlands. We also have it in certain areas in the Netherlands, in political parties, certain areas in the city. It happens. And the system of checks and balances should deal with it. And so a good score, I would say, confirms what is also researched by university scholars. The first one is also an important one, peer pressure. Peer pressure is actually that a parliamentarian that is chosen to represent the people actually decides what the political party for which he is active wants. And so the peer pressure is often top down. At least that is outcome of studies, not only on Aruba, of course, but worldwide. That happens. Now, and what is mentioned for Aruba is that because in election, and there is an election for parliament, but the politicians that get the most votes, they get a position as a minister in the government. And so they know each other very well. And the parliamentarians that are chosen in parliament, are they strong enough? Are they independent enough to go against party discipline? And that's an important finding in the FESCA report, also in the rapport Calidad, the VODC report. And what we found out in our interviews is that this is confirmed. And the explanation that the professors give, Hogers, Van Rijn, yeah, that is indeed that this happened. This is an issue. Yeah, how could you change that system, change the checks and balances? Yeah, well, you could insert a new election. Each 2 years you have an election, one for the government, one for the House. You could do it like that. and then you have a different mix, and there is another system of checks and balances. Well, I'm not saying that that is the way it should be, but that is at least one of the suggestions that were made in order to avoid peer pressure. So patronage, peer pressure are issues that were brought up in our research. Some of the respondents that we interviewed were highly critical. Others were more moderate. Also between the professors that we spoke. Now, business lobbying. That's if you look at the Liberis case, which is in appeal now. That happens. It's not to say that it happens in Parliament, but in general, we have examples that business lobbying is part of the system, and that it should be addressed with in the checks and balances.
Thomas?
Now,
there's one question. You partially discussed it. Can you explain the difference between political patronage and business lobbying? That's a question in the chat.
Yeah, if it's patronage, then it's always like people know each other. And the reward is that you know where the support is coming from. And that could be, of course, that could be businesses.
Yeah.
But lobbying also happens, and you probably know more about lobbying than I do, but lobbying could also be by businesses that are new on the island. There are the pharmacy industry, or in this moment we have the cannabis industry that's being explored as a lucrative business on the island. You have different new businesses. You have hotel business and parliamentarians, and these business owners do not always know each other. So that's not patronage, because these people cannot vote. But is there business lobbying going on? Well, the suspicion is, the rumor is, Tom has it that it happens. But if it is lobbying in a corrupt way, that's of course something completely different.
I agree. I think political patronage, as we try to describe it in this polling, is that there are established networks within key individuals, often with the same ideology, who've known each other for quite some time, and who will always make sure they favor one another in whatever positions they are. So established networks, and of course business lobbying can be also part of this political patronage, but here it's more isolated events where you actually individuals try to lobby decision making, and there's still a distinction between the actor, the one who's influencing, and the one who's being influenced. While political patronage, it's actually all actors are part of this network.
Yeah. Patronage is really a symbiotic relationship.
Indeed. Yeah.
Yes. All right. Now, how could you? There was a solution given. Training in morality and integrity is a suggestion. Train everybody to have a better self-governance in the realization of these checks and balances. Next slide is about citizens' rights in relation to the role of parliamentarians. Now, the case, we made a case. And the case is about the fires on the dump near Paquitenbos on the landfill. So due to fire and smoke on the landfill causing severe nuisance, this particular citizen feels that her fundamental human rights, for example, the right of life and the right of self-determination in Aruba, are violated. She sends repeatedly letters to the accountable minister, but does not receive any response. She decides to send a letter to the president of the parliament in order to let Staten discuss the issue and demand for the minister to respond on the matter in the House. So she sends a letter. Now, how should Parliament deal with that? Seen from the perspective of checks and balances. They should control the executive. Now, we have 4 alternatives. Refer the citizen to the government and the minister, or go to court. as this is not a matter for Parliament. Reject, because the citizen should file an official petition or have the support of at least 3 parliamentarians to get a letter in the House, or call the minister to the House, have a public debate and address the citizen letter as a matter of general interest, or address the matter in the Central Commission to assess the matter. So what do you think? Okay, so the majority says...
You're still busy? 30
still
seconds.
waiting.
Still 30 seconds. 15 seconds left.
Yes.
I guess
I
everyone's...
think no, the last shift. Well, this is not it's not a multiple choice exam, as we have them at the university. These are suggestions. Now the majority says that it should go to the Central Commission, and that is the proper way. That is what should happen. Now we interviewed this lady, and she claims that all the letters that she sent were not addressed. And in the interview that we had with the parliamentarian, it was also stated that this letter, or these letters, because she sent several, were not addressed in the Central Commission as well. So yes, well, what happened is that finally she was sent to the judiciary, and she had her day in court, and the court decided that it was not urgent enough for her due to the course of the wind, which was mainly off island and probably should not always target her house, because that's what the issue was about. But if you look at this from a perspective of checks and balances, then it is strange that that such a letter is not addressed in the Central Commission, because that's what the Central Commission is for. We have a document that is called het Reglement van Orde, and that also subscribes that the Central Commission should address these letters. Now, unfortunately for that lady, that did not take place. After the letter is addressed in the Central Commission, then the parliamentarians can have a feeling and decide what they will do with that matter. Call the minister to the House and have a debate, or something else. But you could understand that from a perspective of checks and balances, and also due to the fact that there is a close link between 5,000 civilians and the representation by one parliamentarian, that letters should be taken very serious, of course. Another option that is stated in Aruban Constitution is the right to file a petition with signatures of a few people, and then you file a petition to address a certain matter. And these landfill fires, they cause an enormous amount of nuisance, hinder, overlast, as they say. And well, go to court is costly, and the feeling was that it was not addressed in a proper way by the judiciary. That is also so. The lady that we interviewed was left with a very unsatisfied feeling, not being supported by Staten, and according to her, judge made a wrong decision. He said she only lived there for 7 years, but that's not true. She was born there. And that's something else. Procedure, you should think, Aruban people, about what is the procedure and how should checks and balances in such a case take place. Are there any questions? No remarks? Okay, then we go to the next one.
Thomas, there's one remark in the chat.
Yes.
Noreen says, note that this case, let's see, doesn't stand alone. It happens more than regularly that letters petitions are ignored.
Yeah, that's something, and that's what I said before. I mean, in this case, the President of Parliament addressed the matter in person with the lady when she went to the Parliament to talk about it. And he said, well, this is not something for us. If you want to file it, then you need to find support of at least 3 parliamentarians to get the letter in the House, addressed in the House. But that is not the way it should go. Eh? If you have the 3 parliamentarians, then it is going to be discussed in a public reunion. But if you send a letter, that should be dealt with in the Central Commission. And it's not the role of the President to personally reject letters. Now, I see there is some support in that field from Ben King, who has the same affair. Lisette Malmberg also has experience in that field. And so that is something that, well, should be on the concern of people. So we talked about two aspects now. We talked about capacity. We mentioned the resources, the middelen, and we talked about independence. We had 2 examples, and now we talk about the role the Parliament has oversight on the executive, exercise the checks and balances. Now we already talked about the budget control. And we thought it would be a nice way to set up a case against. Yeah, well, this also might seem pretty familiar for you. The motion. Oh, now it's gone. What? Where am I? Yes, I'm back in the case. How do I want to slide away? No, that doesn't work. I can't see the. No. Minister loses confidence of her own party in the governing coalition after issuing statements regarding her governing party, colleagues. We won't mention any names, but maybe you have an idea who is meant here. Coalition partners fear the minister will not execute a recently adapted policy. For parliamentarians from the leading government party, this is reason to discuss the functioning of the minister and to consider issuing a motion, a vote of non-confidence. Now, then we made the poll again. What do you think about the way this motion should be addressed? That's the first part. Where should it be addressed? In the Central Commission, in a public reunion, in a closed reunion, and with the confidentiality, or just send it to the President and he'll decide? What do you think?
Ten more seconds.
Yes, we have the outcome that makes common sense. Discuss such a thing in public reunion. This goes to the heart of the democracy on Aruba. If you want to file a motion, a vote against a particular minister because you do not agree with her policy, as a her in this case, then you should not do that in the Central Commission. And why not? Well, several reasons, but the Central Commission is not publicly accessible. And transparency is, of course, a main point in the functioning of the system of checks and balances. People should be able to see what you're doing. And also, the procedure in a Central Commission is not the same as in a public reunion. And the parliamentarians know this also. So in this particular case, the suspicion is that it was done with some political ideas in mind. But discuss this in a closed reunion, that's not in the Reglement van Orde and the C option. And it is also not in the Constitution, in the staatsregeling. And what you could have is a preliminary meeting between the voorzitters van the presidents of the leaders of the different political parties and the independent parliamentarians. In a senioren convent, they call that. That's you can discuss where it should be held. But if you want to file a motion, then you do not file that in a Central Commission. Now, there's a lot written about it. In one of the papers, I think it was Notitia Klaar, Camionando de Staatsregeling in RVO, Reglement van Orde. Il Parlamento está necesario para proteger y salvar guardia nos democracia. You can all look that up. It was written in the 27th of October, and there has been published a lot about this particular case. And we can go to the second aspect of this case, also about checks and balances. That's about the voting. So after the Central Commission, let's assume that it goes to the public meeting and the President calls the motion for a vote. A number of parliamentarians does not accept the fact that the motion is issued in a commission meeting where the minister could not defend herself. And voting after such a meeting is held is not acceptable for them. So they leave the meeting and even the building. A member that intends to leave calls for a count of heads. It turns out that even without a count of heads, only 9 parliamentarians remain in the meeting. 1 parliamentarian is absent, but told the president personally that he is in favor of the motion. So then we get the poll. How should the motion be dealt with? Well, it should be accepted as there is a majority vote. Everybody was in the house when the meeting started. Or B, it should be rejected if there is a minority vote. Or, and then I should click it down, there cannot be voted because that's void. Or D, the president decides about the vote on the motion. So what do you think? I clicked the score away, so I can't see it.
I will share it with you in a bit.
Oh, okay, all right. Cool.
We have 20 seconds more before the poll closes. Ten seconds. And here we go.
Yes, well, the majority knows what went on in Parliament. If the parliamentarians leave the House at the moment that the President calls the vote, then you first have to count the number of heads that are present, and if that's below the 11, then you can't even vote. Yeah. Now, it would be nice to have a verbal interaction, so you could tell me what you think about this process of both the voting. The president also counted the vote of Mr. Howell, who was not present in the building, but had told him that he was in favor of the motion, which is totally logical because he's poor. But this is void. You can't do it. So this motion was withdrawn by the President of Parliament, but the conclusion should be that in a system with fair checks and balances and transparency, you should not even have such a situation. And if you want to, tie this up, then you should maybe change the staatsregeling and the constitution and make it a bit more detailed, so there is no space to squeeze between, as was done in this specific situation. Now, are there any remarks or questions? I don't see any remarks. I see some students who signed in, former students of mine, Janice, Puran. No questions? All right, so maybe, Deborah, this is a good moment for a short break and that we then continue with executive in a few moments.
Yes, that's possible. I think if everyone feels the need to, or maybe we can ask the audience if they need of a break. If everyone could just indicate if they would prefer we just continue and then we'll finish a bit on time. Or if everyone would prefer a 5-minute grab a glass of water break. So
yeah, we can have a poll about that.
Oh, take a bit more time to make, but I think there's a question as well. Did you just answer that?
Yeah, I see a question. Walter wants a break. Maybe we should, maybe people can think about some questions.
Yeah.
Have a glass of water. And then after the break, we still have half an hour to 45 minutes to talk about the executive and ask questions, all right?
Okay, so I see it's almost 11:20. So would it make sense that we come back at 11:25?
Yeah, that's good.
Yes. So everyone I will turn off my camera as well and microphone, and I will see you all in 5 minutes. Nou, Thomas, ben je er klaar voor?
Ben mag nu, maar die mag zijn microfoon even aanzetten, geloof ik. Ja.
Sure.
Hi, Ben. So thank you all. Hope everyone grabbed something to drink and that you are energized for the really last bit of the presentation. Ben, would you like me to click further or would you like to be handed over the remote?
You can have the remote.
Okay, thank you. So here we go.
You can go to the previous slides, please.
Oh, the previous one, okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Ben Tyner. I'm also a lecturer and researcher at Saxion University. And in 2009, I started my career as a lawyer at the Dutch Council of State. And I have the honor to talk with you about the next pillar of the NIS and the branch executive. Thomas already explained a lot about the trias politica, and I will share with you some of our preliminary findings on this branch. Yes, next slide, please. When we talk about the executive, it's good to bear in mind that the executive or government consists of the king and of the individual ministers. And the king, Willem-Alexander, is represented by the governor, and the current governor is Mr. Alfonso Boekhout. And as Thomas already mentioned, government and parliament, they play an important role in adopting law and legislation, and they are kind of a cooperation. They form a cooperation to adopt law. And when we talk about the executive, also the Council of Ministers is very important, and that council is chaired by the Prime Minister, current Prime Minister, Mrs. Wever-Kroes. The powers and responsibilities of the executive, they are laid down in the Constitution, the Staatsregeling, and in the rules of procedure of the Council of Ministers. And something special to mention is that Aruba has a plenipotentiary minister, een gevolmachtigd minister. His name is Guilfed Besaril. That minister is seated in the Aruba House in The Hague, and he is the representative of Aruba within the Council of Ministers of the Kingdom. Yes, next slide, please. Okay, previous, I thought there was a slide with a picture of the government, but that one was during Thomas' presentation. It doesn't matter. I wanted to say that when we talk about the executive, it's not about the king or the governor, because they're not politically responsible. It's about the Council of Ministers and about the individual ministers. And as you all probably know, right now the map poor and red, the multi-party cabinet, in contrast to previous cabinets. Those cabinets were one-party cabinets, and the AVP is right now opposition party. And during our research so far, and Thomas and Willeke talked about that already, but the desk research, the interviews, etc. We discovered that there are some strengths and some matters of priorities. I won't call them weaknesses, but I call them matters of priorities concerning the executive branch. And I'd like to share some of those points with you, and those so-called overarching themes, I would call them. They, let's say, they touch the different indicators Willeke already mentioned, like responsibility, accountability, integrity, etc. Okay, when we look at the executive, I will talk with you about some strength. When we look at the executive branch, we see there's a solid legal foundation, a legal framework within the Constitution, in the Staatsregeling, and in the rules of procedure of the Council of Ministers. The Constitution safeguards the integrity and the responsibility of the government. For example, ministers are constitutionally required to affirm or take an oath declaring that they have not given or promised anything to obtain their office and will not do so and will not be bought. We call that the oath of purity. And ministers will abide by the Constitution and promote the welfare of Aruba to the best of their ability. We call that the oath of office. You can find this in the Constitution in Article 3 under 3.11. And there are different state regulations that regulates the position and the competence of the government. For example, about the three powers of the executive, the administrative powers, the regulatory powers, and the power to dissolve parliament. And there's also strict regulation, Thomas already mentioned, about budget and annual accounts, and there's also a code of conduct for ministers. So we see that in theory there's a solid legal foundation. What we also see that the elaboration of this foundation sometimes lacks. I will talk about that later. Please go to the previous one, Deborah. This was the first bullet point, the solid legal foundation as one of the strengths we've discovered so far during our research. Another one is that corporate governance, transparency, and integrity are spare points in the current governance program, Junta para Aruba. Although during our research so far, we found out, I already mentioned, that elaboration of these spare points sometimes lacks because there are not many concrete integrity regulations. I won't say none, but not that many. And another strength is that recently there was some adoption of legislation to promote integrity. Thomas also mentioned that ordinance on financing political parties and the ombudsman. So I think that are some strengths we've discovered so far. Yeah, let's move on. Besides the strengths, we find out that there are some matters of priority that touches the different indicators. And I will start with the first, the role of the so-called intermediaries. I think this bullet point is about the indicators, independency and transparency. Our research so far indicates that a minister has his or her own secretary's office with consultants, coordinators, advisors. We call them intermediaries. An intermediary between the minister and the civil servants. We also found out that the influence and the powers of these intermediaries is ambitious. So we think that is a matter of priority. And I will ask you a polling question later on about this topic. Okay, second bullet point is the disclosure of legislation. And I think this touches the indicators, transparency and accountability. During our desk research, we found out that there are no sanctions in case of violation of the active disclosure of legislation. And that also includes drafts, ordinances, and also advices of the Council of State and of the Court of Audit. So we think this is also a matter of priority. And the last bullet point is the conflicts of interest within the Council of Ministers. And I will talk with you on this topic with 3 points. The first one is no public register for conflicting positions of a minister. And this is the more important when you look at the Constitution in Article 2.3 under 2 about the incompatibiliteiten. That article in the Constitution says a minister can't be at the same time a governor, a representative of the governor, a member of the Council of State, member of the Court of Audit, member of the judiciary, etc. And it's hard to determine, to monitor whether a minister exercises a function that could influence his or her independence. We didn't find that many data on this topic. So that's the first one. The second one, it is unknown if ministers abstain from the vote in case of a conflict of interests. And this is unknown because there's an obligation of secrecy regarding the topics that are discussed in the Council of Ministers. So it's, for us, during our research so far, it's unknown to know if ministers abstain from votes within the Council of Ministers when a topic is discussed that could influence his or her independency. And the last one related to this bullet point, to the conflicts of interest in the Council of Ministers is that results of investigations and inquiries for candidate ministers are not published, and those investigations and inquiries they are about the judicial antecedents investigation. They consist on a report on fiscal situation, and they consist of a state security report for candidate ministers. And we found out that it's not clear whether the ministers of the current cabinet have been subjected to screening and investigations, and what the results of these investigations are. And this also related to the fact that results are confidential. So that's the third point concerning this bullet point. And I see that there are some questions in the chat. Let me see. Should the procedure of appointing important government officials be regulated by law to prevent the possibility of corruption? Ling asked. I think that's a good suggestion. We already discovered that during our research so far. And let me see. Randall also wrote something in the chat about the reports from the Central Bank of Aruba. And the Central Bank released a report that more than 50% of the Aruba population believes that corruption has increased in the past few years. We took a note on that report, of course. Does the research indicate that integrity can be tough? Yes, it does, I think. Or is this just a fundamental moral issue that is engraved in the Aruban population? For me, it's hard to give an answer to that. Maybe Thomas, because of his experience in Aruba, can to this question.
Which one is it? Can you repeat the question? Can you repeat the question, Ben?
You can't see the question from Randall in the chat.
Oh, Randall, Central Bank. Yes, Randall.
Yeah, the report of the Central Bank.
I was reading Link's question also about the Constitutional Court. That's something that they have in St. Martin. If you want that, then staatsregeling has to be changed. A third of Parliament should vote for that. Something else. Randall's question. Central Bank released a report that more than 50% of the rural population believes that corruption has increased in the past few years. This gives us indirectly also an indication on the perception of integrity. Yes, goes to the heart. Absolutely. The trust of the people in het vertrouwen in de rechtsstaat is aangetast. Does research indicate that integrity can be though? What do you mean?
Tough.
Does research
Tough.
Can be tough? Yeah, tough.
Yeah.
Yes.
I answered that question with yes, yeah. Thomas, and I asked.
Is it just a fundamental moral issue?
Whether it's in the population, and I think this is a very important question to go to the root cause of corruption. Corruption is emerging in every country, and we always see the symptoms of corruption, but we would like to understand the root cause. And actually, this is something which is related to one of the chapters in our NIS, which is called Corruption Profile. But of course, it's related to the foundations. So what are the foundations of a given society to understand what the weaknesses or improvement are? So I guess the networking, the fact that it's an island, the colonial period, there are many things which we found out. And of course, Nelly Schotberg has also written a book about the root cause of corruption in this region of the world. So we haven't finalized it yet, but this will definitely come back in the future webinars. So good question. Very important to understand the root cause. Whether it's in the people, and I don't think the people individually will be corrupt, but to understand the foundations of a society, or to understand what is a cultural, what are the mechanisms. So good question.
Yeah, what is the morality on the island? That's very hard to get a grip on. Yeah.
And it's good to mention here that a lot of interviews mention that the small-scale society of Aruba play an important role in the independency, etc.
Yeah, that's a good point. Small scale, kleinschaligheid, they say in Dutch. But there are other reports that also say that there are small countries like Luxembourg, Singapore. I can mention, Willeke knows some others, but where you don't have it. So kleinschaligheid is not always. It's also between the ears, I say. It's a moral issue. The critical attitude, the morality, that also plays a role.
Yeah. And a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so what we've seen in corruption perception index is when a country is labeled to be corrupt, of course, you get a different type of investments, often also with some from fraud and money laundering. And it's about perception. So people start to believe actually that they are corrupt. So in a sense, they lose hope and they won't actually tackle things to change it. So there are at least probably 10 factors which play a role in the Aruban society, and some of them we've already discovered, but not all of them. So that's why we like to have this webinar to invite you to also reflect upon that, so that we actually have a clear picture of what is actually in the foundations of the Aruban society, and where can we actually make small changes to start changing the entire system. Because if you do not change any aspects in the foundations, it's difficult to make the NIS stronger by introducing any more laws. So back to you, Ben.
Yes, okay. I shared with you some of our strengths and methods of priorities concerning the executive branch. And of course, we are kind of curious on your opinions. So we have some polling questions about this pillar. And the first one is, Aruba has sufficient constitutional safeguards to promote the executive transparency and integrity. Do you agree or do you disagree with this poll?
We're almost there. Yeah.
So 13 people say Aruba has sufficient constitutional safeguards within the constitution, within the rules of procedure of the Council of Ministers, and 21 people say these safeguards are insufficient. So I think for us as a research group, it's interesting to hear your opinion about what has to be added to the Constitution, for example, to have sufficient constitutional safeguards. Maybe you can post some suggestions in the chat box. Well, let's move on to the next polling question.
Yes, hold on, Thomas. And then, yeah.
Sorry?
I already promised you a polling question about the role of the intermediaries, the coordinators and advisors, and the poll is the role of those coordinators and advisors should be legally defined. Do you agree or do you disagree?
Yes, here we are.
That's quite obvious. Almost everybody says the role of those coordinators and advisors should be legally defined. And
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, Thomas?
Yes, if I may add, that's really a thing that popped up in all the interviews that I had with civil servants, also with people from the academics. And you have the situation that a minister has a power, but for some kind of political deal or other reason, there is a coordinator that has a far-going influence in the daily running of affairs within a project or in department affairs. Now, everybody read the paper, sees what's going on within the DIP and the other government agencies. And that's really an issue where it's very hard to get a grip on, because it's a minister that nominates, appoints these people. And of course, you have Departamento Recurso Humano, but in practice, negative advices are not followed, and a minister takes a decision, and you get a system that's absolutely not transparent and unwanted. So good point.
Well, we have 10 minutes left, so let's move on to the last polling question before we end with our call for input. It's an ABCD question, as you can see. Well, let's see. The limited control of the executive is caused by A, the dominant role of the ministers, B, the weak role of parliament, C, the lack of effective control mechanisms, and D, the lack of transparency within the Council of Ministers. And there's not one correct answer, but we are curious on your opinion about this poll. And the NICA is asking, can we choose more than one? Deborah, is that possible, or?
No, we just did one, but
okay,
we can take into consideration the next time. See. Yes, I think
most of the people choose B or C, and the weak role of Parliament and the lack of effective control mechanisms. And I think this really relates to Thomas' part of the presentation, the role of the Parliament. 13 people think that role is kind of weak, or they don't have effective control mechanisms for controlling the executive in the cooperation of making laws together.
Yeah, Parliament has effective control mechanisms, but all the reports say, and also the respondents say, that in practice that's not used in an effective way, and that makes the functioning not always strong enough, as you say, up to improvement.
Yeah.
And maybe what also should be stressed is that a minister has in Aruba society a very strong position. And then you also go to the foundations. And once a minister is elected, then it's broadly accepted that he shows that he has the power. And then there seems to be a mechanism in society that what he does is backed up by this body of of departments and broad acceptance in society, that he can execute his power in a very personal way, and not always controlled in a strong way by parliamentarians, nor by other bodies, or he doesn't listen. That's also an option. So all good points. Yeah. As I said, it is not a multiple choice test. These are all issues that we received from respondents, from the research.
Okay, this I think was the last question concerning the executive. Maybe it's good that Thomas, as the project leader, that you will end the webinar with our call for input.
Yes, you can. Just have to click. Yeah, we already we can have a look at all the questions that were imposed, that were placed in the chat box, so we can have a look at that. Some interesting remarks. I see from Mr. Bakhuis. How would you execute that in practice? And 2 elections? Well, then you would have to think about that, of course. And you could also think about other systems, but you could of course have 2 elections that would then you would vote for representatives of the current political parties. But then you would have an election that would be more about plans that an individual has, and then if the individual within the map of the AVP, of the POR, of the RED, or another party, and maybe you get more parties and people would vote more for individuals. And then in another election, now your question is about that first election, then you will have candidates that are chosen on their power and their determination, and maybe also about their integrity. And that would go alongside the current political parties or individual members. That's also possible. But as I said, you could think about other systems, and that's also brought up in the presentations about good governance. But any ideas for the moment? Maybe it's an idea that if there are suggestions, publications, articles, if you want to inform us, that you contact the Center for Lifelong Learning, and they will send it to us. That seems
if I may add to that, Thomas, I would like to suggest, because there were a lot of questions about this PowerPoint presentation, and we already agreed that we, Deborah will send a PowerPoint presentation, and in this mailing we will include one of our general mailboxes where you can actually email any suggestions, names of people we should interview, articles which we might have missed so far. So I'm requesting, Deborah, would that be possible for you to send to all the participants today the PowerPoint and include one of our email addresses?
Yes, it will.
Okay, so, and indeed, Thomas and Ben, I saw many interesting questions, which I would love to discuss more into depth, also the role of education, political system. So we will actually take all these polling outcomes, but also these questions for our research. And also some of these questions we might be able to reflect upon during the second webinar next week, so that we actually make some general observations on questions we're pretty much related, and we will get back to you about that. So hopefully then we have the interchange of ideas after this webinar.
Yes. Thomas, is there anything else you'd like to add before I just say a closing word?
No, I think Willeke just captured it in a good way. I thought it was a nice, interesting meeting. Hope the participants liked the way we did the presentation, and we choose to do it in a less boring way with our little polls to get feedback from the field, because that's what you are. We want to bring you into this NIS. And I forgot to mention that we already worked with Dinaika Helder and other students from the University of Aruba. If students of the university have an idea about research in their graduation projects, stuff like that. Oh, I'm still here, yeah, and that's also a good suggestion. That this should be an open platform in which all these topics are discussed. That's what we want to stress.
No, thank
Over to you.
Thank you all. I would like to thank you, Thomas, Ben, Willeke, and Frank, and Esther. Even though Esther has been behind the scenes, she has played a very important role, and Frank will be presenting in the future as well, but has played a very important role in answering some of your questions and drawing to our attention which questions need really urgent priority. I thank you for this very interesting presentation. And as Thomas and Willeke said, this is the first of a series of 3. The next will be next week on the 19th, same time. And I won't say same place, because to participate, you will have to register via our website, www.uaaw/lifelong learning. If not, send us an email and we'll make sure that you get the invitation. And if you're not on our mailing list, then this is an opportunity for you to join. And you'll be the first one to receive this information. Please share the word with your friends. That was an interesting one. And I think this is something that the Aruban community should definitely participate with. And I see that many have, and I appreciate that very much. So on behalf, again, of the University Center for Lifelong Learning, it was a pleasure. And I look forward to seeing you at either next week or any one of our future presentations. Thank you very much.